Bow chicka wow wow. Tell them the joke you just made, Erica. Go.
It's not. It's brown chicken, brown cow.
Brown chicka cow wow.
Okay, all right.
Go.
I'm full of regret. I'm not doing any. I'm not participating.
All right. Welcome to an episode of F This Farm. Brown chicken brown wow. All right. I will stop.
How long is this gonna go on for?
They need at least 27 seconds of me. And then they'll have 30 minutes of you. So this is an episode of F This Farm. Follow us at F This Farm.
Sounds like our sex life.
And Erica at Merriweather Meadows. And This Farm at Merriweather Meadows. I just retweet what she says and a couple other little tidbits. So this episode, we are going to be covering our regrets, our past, and how he chose this house. Does that sound right?
Sure. Yeah. Jump in. It's been a week of transition. It's starting to feel like spring, which is exciting and also terrifying because we have a ton of shit to do before the ground thaws. We have chickens coming in the mail in a couple of weeks. We have hatching eggs that we're picking up. Our own chickens are laying faster than we can keep up with right now. So we're sort of running around with our hair on fire a little bit. Armando's sister and her partner also, they were living with us for a little while. They moved out this week to start a new venture in Chicago, and we're very excited for them. But we're just in transition. We have the house back. We're sort of moving faster than we can keep up with. And in that period of transition, I feel like we usually have moments of deep pondering anytime we're changing gears, and this week has been no different. And one of the things I think we've both sort of been stewing over since we got here, really, is if we made the right decision in getting this house.
And getting this farm. Or I guess not really a farm just yet.
Right. This bare, open acreage. And this week it really sort of like was just hanging over my head as we're moving into our first growing season, just wondering if like we've made a huge mistake because we have a ton of work ahead of us. And yeah,
I feel like right now we'll go into this a little bit, but we're kind of between like working on the house and working on the farm. And that's what we're trying to like catch up on. Like we're doing house projects and we're trying to get the farm ready. If that makes sense. So we're like, I'm making a brooder this week and I'm making chicken coops because we're going to have our chickens on pasture.
And I'm painting the trim in our living room and we're putting up a door in the basement. So it just feels like we're spread all over the place. And yeah, sort of in that moment of sort of reflection that we've been having this week, there's been this one house in particular that I will say has been haunting me since we got here. It's a house that we put a bid on last January before the pandemic hit. We didn't get it because we underbid, gravely underbid. Yeah, we are definitely cheap motherfuckers and basically didn't meet their asking price, and we deserve nothing but to stew in our own regret because of that, because it was a screaming deal, or what we thought was a screaming deal. And it was 35 acres. It had a barn. It was a house that was slightly bigger than this, but had a much more functional layout. And it was closer to a town that Armando really wanted to be in. So, yeah.
Montpelier.
It's Montpelier, the capital of the state, smallest capital in the world. No, not in the world. In the United States.
Also the only one without a McDonald's.
Fun. Didn't know that. And yeah, so this week we actually drove to look at that house, which sold
from afar. We didn't break in. We just looked at it from afar, from the road.
We just drove by it. And I guess a little bit about our home search. I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about how this process has looked for us from sort of start to finish?
Yeah, I mean, we moved here from Wilmington. I guess we'll do a little more of a backstory. We moved here from Wilmington. We spent 3 years pretty much flipping a house. We bought it for $40,000 and sold it for 3 or 4 times more than that.
$155,000.
$155,000. Yeah. So, and we did all the work ourselves. And before that, we were on a boat and living in San Francisco, saving money because San Francisco is extremely expensive. And we flipped that boat too, I guess, but we lost a little bit of money on it. But we saved money on rent.
Sure. Yeah, the boat was a nightmare, but it was the only way we could afford to live in San Francisco at the time, which is where we were both I was working.
Needless to say, we worked on our home for 4 years straight between the boat and Wilmington. And I think just knowing that coming into this purchase is why we were looking at homes. I just want to say that because we were looking at homes that did not need work or nearly as much work because we were tired of living in rubble, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And during our house searching process, we weren't in this state. We were in North Carolina. And so we were finding homes on Realtor and on Trulia and Zillow. And we had a fantastic realtor here on the ground who was going and looking at houses for us and sort of sifting through the weeds and then sending us what was worth looking at. And
her name's Lauren Gould of Greenlight Realty. Find her at Lauren Gould.
She's a dream.
Know if that's really her Instagram or whatever.
Yeah, she was an absolute goddamn dream. We loved her, and we worked with her for several months while we were looking in the Montpelier area, and it was really hard looking for a house outside of the state, and we really had to trust her, and we really did trust her, and she was a huge help. She's the one who sort of laid eyes on the regrettable house that we did not end up getting. But we'd made an offer on that house and we'd never seen it in person. And that's what we did this week. Like I said, it's sort of been hanging over our heads. And so this week we drove out to take a look at it. It was 2 hours from where we live, from the home that we did end up buying. And it did it. How do you think it went?
Well, it was closer to the town that I loved. And I will say that it didn't feel like it could, like we made a mistake. It felt like a lateral move. I think we could have been happy one with or the other, if that makes sense. That one was on a rockier. It looked like on the side of a mountain, rockier. Not as much pasture, and we would have to have cleared lots of trees, which I do not want to do unless like they're dying or there's some reason to do it. Personally, I know some people don't mind it. I did not want to deal with killing trees, so that was something that was important to me, like not having to deal with that. And the land we did end up with, I mean, just to note, we don't have to clear any trees if we don't have to. It's 10 acres of cleared pasture.
Yeah, I have no regrets. The house that had been sort of gnawing at me, that I was sort of fantasizing about for the last 8 months or so since we moved here. It definitely looked like it needed more work. Once we saw it, drove by it, sleuthed by it in person. The land was much shittier than I thought, as was the barn. And it wasn't in a great location. It was in a decent location in relation to the city Armando wanted to be in, but it didn't look like it was in an area or in a neighborhood where I don't know, where there was really strong community. There was a lot of the houses around it were very disparate from each other, and we definitely ended up on a street where I feel like we're all sort of like-minded, doing the same thing, similar values, we drove out, and I sort of had a huge sigh of relief, and did not feel as crazy as I thought I would, driving by a house that we did not buy, driving 2 hours to see a house that we did not buy. And so I'm glad I could sort of close the door on that and stop thinking about it and think more about the house we ended up with. So the house we did end up with, as Armando said, it is the original property that we bought that we are currently living at. It's 10 acres of just open hayfields, deeply rutted hayfields, but open hayfields. We don't have to do any clearing. We don't have to do any brush hogging. And we were really excited by that, I think, especially after some of the properties that we had seen where we definitely would have had to cut down a fucking forest to plant anything. So yeah, we sort of, I think we pulled the trigger on this house. I hate that. I'm reversing that. We moved, we moved on this house, pretty quickly, you know, again, sight unseen, right? We made an offer without seeing it. That offer was accepted. And then we drove up here, to lay eyes on it. And, that was the only time we saw it before we closed. You know, we didn't get to do a final walkthrough or anything. And we also did not get to work with Lauren Gould on this purchase because we moved out of our original search zone. So we were sort of handed off to another realtor in this area who we both hate. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of finding a realtor that you like, and fucking firing the ones that you don't, because we had a real piece of shit realtor experience.
If you don't want to work with a realtor, find out the state you're looking at, you don't need a realtor. That will save you a certain percentage, because, you know, you have to pay the realtor. I think it's what, 3 or...
each side pays 3%, but essentially the buyer is paying that, right? Like the seller is going to tag on the realtor fees in their asking price. So yeah, if you feel confident enough to represent yourself, you know, find yourself a good closing attorney. It's a lot, especially for a first time home buyer. I don't know that I would have been able to do it our first time, but this was our second home purchase, and I deeply regret not just seeing ourselves through with it, because that's essentially what we did, because we had a piece of shit realtor, and Lauren Gould doesn't work in this area.
Yeah. So I guess since we're talking about advice, we can transition just a little bit into that, Erica. What other advice can we give people when they're looking for their farm? You know, we had, when we first started looking, we had a line where we wanted to have outbuildings, and we ended up with a property that had 0 outbuildings. Yeah,
no sheds, no barns, no chicken coops in place. It is a house on 10 acres.
Right, and the house we wanted was 40 acres.
The one that we can see?
Yes.
35 acres.
35 acres with a barn. And I guess I'm trying to get at, not all acres are created equal, so we compromised on less acres with more pasture and no outbuildings. Is that correct? Is that, maybe I just transitioned like 3 different subjects there.
Yeah. I mean, I think our short list changed over time. We were looking for a really long time. I mean, we started this search 3 years ago. We drove up to Vermont for the first time 3 years ago with the sole idea of, let's look at it and see if we want to move here. And we did 3 or 4 other exploratory trips since then. But when we first moved up, obviously, you know, we had this sort of dream idea of what our dream property would be. And we had this like hard and fast list that we weren't necessarily willing to budge from. And throughout the process, the more houses we saw, the more that changed. So I think initially we were okay thinking about an older home until we started seeing older homes and thought, oh, we've been renovating houses for going on 4 years now. I think you were exhausted laying on your back in a crawl space. I was exhausted scraping lead paint and vacuuming out asbestos. I think we both decided, like, actually, we're looking at homes that are 1980s or older. And in New England, those are few and far between.
And 1980 or older is, just so you know, like, lead paint has been outlawed at this point, and asbestos as well is no longer being used. So that was why we set that line. We knew that any house built after that was not going to have these features. So that was the beginning part of our journeys, like 1980. And yeah, it was just important.
After we had seen a bunch of old houses.
Right. And, you know, like older houses as well, I mean, they have a basement, but it might be a wet basement.
Up here, yeah, I mean, it depends on where you're looking. But yeah, in New England, wet basements are pretty common. And that is exactly, I had no idea what that meant. We grew up in Florida. We then lived in North Carolina. We had never really thought about basements. And coming up here and seeing what some of these houses are built on. And, you know, obviously some of them are 100, 150 years old, older than that, and they're doing just fine. But for somebody who is not